There's a version of that afternoon that lives in my body more than my memory. The ballroom lights too warm, the smell of lilies and champagne, my father's voice carrying over the microphone like he owned the room. He always did own the room. That's the thing about my father. He could walk into any space and make it about him without saying a single word about himself. And on that day, the day my sister got married, he found a way to do it by talking about me instead. War did a number on her, he said, and he laughed when he said it, that easy laugh he saves for moments he wants everyone to think are harmless. The groom's family chuckled, polite, uncertain, following his lead because that's what you do when the father of the bride makes a joke at a wedding. I felt my face go still. I've trained my face to go still. It's one of the only things the last 6 years taught me that I actually use anymore. And then Commander Daniel Reyes, my new brother-in-law, a Navy SEAL commander with a jaw like it was carved out of granite and eyes that had clearly spent a career reading rooms for threats, stopped mid-laugh. I watched it happen in slow motion. I watched the polite chuckle die in his throat. I watched him turn his head, slow, deliberate, the way you turn when some part of your brain has already recognized something before the rest of you catches up. "Ma'am," he said, just that. And the whole room felt the air change. To understand how it came to this, you have to go back. Not 6 years, not even 10. You have to go back to the very beginning, to a house where there were 2 daughters, and only room, it seemed, for one of them to be seen. My name is Marin. I'm the older daughter, the one who was never quite right for this family, the one who took up space in ways nobody had planned for. My sister Claire was the plan. Claire was soft-spoken and agreeable, and good at smiling in photographs, and from the time we were small, my father built his entire identity as a parent around her. Claire got the dance recitals circled on the calendar in red pen. Claire got the framed photos on the mantel, the good china brought out for her birthday, the stories told at dinner parties about my daughter, the one who's going to do something with her life. I got asked, more than once, why I couldn't be more like her. I want to be fair here, because bitterness makes a story feel smaller than it is, and I don't want to make my father into a cartoon. He wasn't cruel in the dramatic, obvious ways. He never yelled. He never hit anyone. His cruelty was quieter than that. It was the kind that shows up in what doesn't get said, in whose achievements get mentioned at the dinner table, and whose get met with a change of subject. When I enlisted at 19, he told his coworkers his daughter was figuring herself out. When Claire got her marketing job at 22, he threw a dinner party. The one person who never did that math, the way the rest of the family did, was my cousin Josie, my mother's sister's daughter, 3 years younger than me, sharp-tongued and loyal in a way that never once wavered, not for a single day of my life that I can remember. Josie used to sit with me on the back porch during holidays, when I couldn't stand being inside anymore, and she never once asked me to explain myself. She just sat there. That's a rarer gift than people think. I served 2 deployments as a Navy hospital corpsman, attached to a special operations platoon, patching up men in places I'm not going to name in detail because some habits don't leave you even years later. I was good at my job. Better than good, I was the person men wanted next to them when things went wrong, because things going wrong was the whole premise of the job, and I did not flinch. I earned that reputation the hard way, the only way it can be earned. One impossible night at a time. There's a version of my life where I could have come home and told that story, and my family would have understood what it cost and what it meant. That's not the version I got. What I got instead was a father who looked at the scar along my jaw and the slight, permanent unevenness in how I walk now, and who decided, somewhere in his mind, that I had become a problem to be managed rather than a daughter to be proud of. He asked me gently the week before the wedding if I could maybe not bring up the war stuff. He asked if I had something normal to wear that would cover the marks a little. He wasn't asking me to hide a flaw. He was asking me to hide the truest thing about myself so that his day, his narrative, his easy dinner party version of our family could stay intact. I said yes. I want to be honest about that. I said yes because I was tired, and because some part of me still wanted, even after everything, to be let back into the room without a fight. But somewhere between that conversation and the wedding day, something in me stopped being willing to shrink. It wasn't a plan, not really, not the way people build a case, brick by brick, toward a reveal. It was smaller than that, and it was slower than that. It was just a decision, made quietly, alone, in my apartment the night before the wedding, standing in front of the mirror. I looked at the scar. I looked at the small, faded ribbon I hadn't worn anywhere in years, folded in a drawer, with a citation I'd never once shown my father. And I decided I wasn't going to cover anything up anymore. Not the walk, not the scar, not the truth. I didn't know, standing there, that the truth was about to walk into that ballroom, wearing dress blues and a wedding boutonniere. Josie picked me up the morning of the wedding. She took one look at me, at the dress I'd chosen, simple and unadorned, nothing hiding anything, and she didn't say a word about it. She just squeezed my hand once, hard, the way she always has, and said, "Good, about time." That was the whole conversation. It was enough. I didn't know Commander Daniel Reyes personally before that day. Claire had only been dating him a year, and our paths, mine overseas, his in a different theater, different units, different corners of a war that was somehow both enormous and small enough that everyone in it seemed to be 6 degrees from everyone else, had never crossed in any way I was aware of. I'd shaken his hand exactly twice before the wedding. Both times he'd been polite, a little formal, the way career officers often are with civilians. I had no reason to think he knew anything about me at all. So when my father made his joke, war did a number on her, and the groom's family laughed along politely because that's what rooms full of strangers do, I braced myself the way I always brace myself now. I made my face still. I told myself it would pass, the way it always passes, the way I've let it pass 100 times before at family gatherings, where my service was either a punchline or a silence. And then Daniel stopped laughing. I watched him look at me, really look, the way you look at something once you've placed it, and I watched his expression shift from polite confusion into something else entirely. Recognition, disbelief, something that looked almost like reverence, which is not a word I use lightly, and not a word I ever expected to see aimed at me in a room full of my family. "Ma'am," he said again, louder this time, and he stood up from his seat at the head table, so fast his chair nearly went over. "You're Corpsman Marin Ashford, 3rd Platoon, Helmand, the extraction at the river crossing." He said it like a man confirming something he could hardly believe, like he was afraid saying it wrong would make it not true. I felt the room go very quiet. "That was you," he said. "You're the one who kept my guy alive for 40 minutes under fire with a chest tube you made out of a pen casing, waiting on a bird that almost didn't come." His voice cracked slightly on that last part, and I understood, in that moment, that this wasn't performance. This was a man who had spent years carrying a debt he never expected to have the chance to name out loud, in front of witnesses, to the person he owed it to. My father's easy dinner party smile had frozen on his face like something left out in the cold too long. "That man was my platoon sergeant," Daniel said, turning now to address the whole room, his voice carrying the way a command voice carries, trained for exactly this, for making sure everyone hears. "He has 2 kids who exist because of what she did that night. I have men on my current team who trained under him. There is a direct line from what she did in that riverbed to men who are alive and serving today." He paused, and when he spoke again his voice had gone lower, rougher. "She was awarded the Bronze Star with valor for that night. I know because I read the citation years later, before I even knew her name attached to a face. I never thought I'd get to stand in a room with her. I want to tell you I had some clever line ready. I didn't. I stood there in a room full of people who had spent years being embarrassed by me, and I said nothing at all, because there was nothing that needed saying. The proof had already walked in wearing his dress blues. The proof had already stood up and said my name like it meant something. My father's face did something I had genuinely never seen it do before. It emptied out. All that easy control, all that ownership of the room, gone, replaced by the specific horror of a man realizing, in real time, in front of everyone whose opinion he actually cared about, that he had spent years mocking the exact thing he should have been telling strangers about with pride. Claire, my sister, radiant in white, watching all of this unfold on what was supposed to be entirely her day, turned to look at me with an expression I'd also never seen on her before. not pity, not the careful, distant sympathy she usually offered me at family functions. Something closer to shame, and underneath the shame, something that looked almost like awe. I didn't know, my father said, quietly, to no one in particular, or maybe to everyone. I didn't, Marin. I didn't know it was like that. You never asked, I said. I didn't say it cruelly. I didn't need to. The two facts were sitting right next to each other in the room now for anyone to compare, the joke he'd made 30 seconds earlier, and the truth Daniel had just laid out plainly in front of 100 witnesses. The distance between those two things did all the work I would have needed a speech to do. Josie beside me didn't say anything either. She just reached over and took my hand again, the same squeeze as that morning, and this time I understood it as something closer to asterisk there it is. The reception found its footing again eventually. Receptions always do. The band starts up. Someone proposes a toast to smooth things over. People find reasons to look away from what just happened so they can get back to the cake. But something in the room had shifted permanently, the way air pressure shifts before a storm and never quite goes back to exactly what it was. My mother's cousins, who had spent a decade making polite, careful conversation with me that never once touched on what I'd actually done overseas, spent the rest of the night asking questions they should have asked years ago. Claire found me by the gift table an hour later, mascara slightly smudged, and hugged me for a long time without saying anything, which from Claire was its own kind of eloquence. Daniel found me too, later, when the dance floor had thinned out. He apologized, unnecessarily, since he owed me nothing but had clearly decided he owed me the words anyway, for putting me on the spot in front of everyone. I told him he hadn't put me on anything. I told him he'd just said out loud what had been true the whole time, whether or not anyone in that room had been willing to look at it. The months since the wedding have rearranged things in ways I'm still getting used to. My father called 3 weeks after and left a voicemail that started with, "I've been thinking," and ended with an apology so awkward and unrehearsed it almost sounded sincere. I think it was sincere, in whatever limited way he's capable of. He asked if we could have lunch. I said yes, eventually, on my own timeline, not because the wedding fixed anything between us, but because I decided somewhere along the way that closure doesn't require forgetting what happened, only refusing to let it keep running the show. Claire and Daniel have made a point, since the wedding, of including me in things the old version of our family never quite managed. Sunday dinners where my service comes up in ordinary conversation instead of getting quietly steered around. Holiday photos where nobody's angling to keep certain angles out of frame. Josie still calls me every week, same as she always has, because Josie never needed a ballroom full of witnesses to know who I was. My father sent a text a few months back. It said, simply, *proud of you. 2 words, no context, no acknowledgement of the years it took him to get there. I looked at it for a long time. I didn't feel the old ache I expected to feel, the one that used to show up whenever some small crumb of his approval finally landed. I felt something calmer than that, something closer to distance, the useful kind, the kind that lets you love someone without needing them to see you clearly in order to know your own worth. I wrote back 3 words, *I know, Dad. Not because I'd forgiven the years, but because I'd stopped waiting for his verdict to decide who I was. People sometimes ask me what it felt like, standing in that ballroom while a stranger in dress blues told my own family who I really was. I tell them the truth. It felt less like vindication and more like relief, the specific relief of finally not being the only person in the room who knew what was true. War did a number on me. My father wasn't wrong about that, not exactly. It just took a man who owed me his best friend's life to say out loud what kind of number it actually was. If this story hit something in you, if you've ever been the one in your family who had to wait for someone else to say your name right before anyone believed it, I'd love to hear your story in the comments. And if you want more of these, hit subscribe, because there are a lot more paper trails and a lot more rooms still waiting to go quiet.